The evening sky had turned a deep orange as the sun began to set over the city. Officer James Kendall adjusted his patrol cap and squinted through his windshield at the traffic ahead. He'd been driving for 3 hours straight, and the coffee he'd grabbed during his brief stop at the gas station was already wearing off. His shift would end in another 2 hours, and he was counting down the minutes. The radio crackled with the usual chatter. A noise complaint downtown, a fender bender on 5th, nothing major. It had been a quiet Thursday, the kind that made Kendall restless. 6 years on the force, and he still found himself hoping for something to happen on slow days like this. Not anything bad, he told himself, just something to break the monotony. Dispatch to all units in the East District. Be advised of reports of suspicious activity near Parkview Apartments. Possible drug transaction. Kendall's hand moved to the radio. Unit 47 responding, I'm 2 blocks away. He made a right turn, scanning the streets with practiced eyes. The neighborhoods were changing around here. What used to be rundown blocks were now filling with renovated homes and young professionals. Still, old problems lingered, and Kendall prided himself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. 3 blocks ahead, a black sedan with tinted windows caught his attention. The car was moving slowly, almost hesitantly, before making a turn without signaling. Kendall straightened in his seat. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a stop, and the tinted windows made him curious. He flipped on his lights and radioed in. Unit 47, conducting traffic stop on black sedan. License plate Victor Lima 7298, corner of Maple and 23rd. Inside the black sedan, Deputy Chief Amara Wilson let out a tired sigh as she noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She'd been lost in thought, mentally reviewing the stack of reports waiting for her signature back at headquarters tomorrow morning. The day had been long. Budget meetings followed by a tense discussion with the mayor about community policing initiatives, capped off with a 3-hour training session for new lieutenants. At 43, Amara had worked her way up through the ranks over 20 years of dedicated service. As one of the few black women in the department's upper command, she carried the weight of being both a symbol and a target. Some days she wore that responsibility easily. Today it had felt heavy. She hadn't even noticed making the turn without signaling. Her neighborhood was just ahead, the home she'd owned for 12 years only 5 minutes away. The hot shower and glass of wine she'd been looking forward to would have to wait. Amara pulled over properly, turning on her interior light and placing both hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible. Even as a deputy chief, she followed the same routine she advised civilians to follow during traffic stops. 15 years of patrol duty before her promotions had taught her that clarity and caution worked both ways. She watched in her side mirror as the officer approached, young, white, moving with the stiff-backed caution they taught at the academy. She didn't recognize him, which wasn't surprising. The department had grown, and she couldn't know all 800 officers personally anymore. As the officer drew closer, Amara reached slowly toward the glove compartment where she kept her registration. She'd get her department ID as well, though she wasn't in uniform. The whole thing would be over in minutes. Officer Kendall observed the driver reaching toward the passenger side of the vehicle. His heart rate kicked up a notch the way it always did during traffic stops. They were unpredictable, potentially dangerous. The training videos they showed at the academy played in his head. Officers approached by seemingly compliant drivers, then suddenly faced with weapons. His hand moved to his holster, a precautionary measure. The tinted windows made it hard to see clearly into the vehicle, though the interior light helped. He could make out a woman alone in the car. Still, protocol was protocol. Stay calm. Follow procedure. He muttered to himself, a habit he'd developed during his first year on patrol. The neighborhood around them was quiet. A couple walked their dog on the opposite sidewalk, glancing curiously at the police lights. A teenager on a bike slowed down to watch. These details registered peripherally in Kendall's awareness as he focused on the vehicle. Driver, please keep your hands visible, he called out, still several feet from the car window. Inside, Amara stopped her movement immediately and returned her hands to the steering wheel. The voice sounded young, a bit tense. She'd heard that tone countless times before, an officer, working to project confidence and authority while managing their own adrenaline. My registration and ID are in the glove compartment, she called back clearly. I'm going to reach for them slowly. Kendall approached the driver's side, standing slightly behind the door for tactical advantage. Now he could see the driver more clearly, a black woman, middle-aged, professionally dressed. She looked tired but composed. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. "License and registration, please," he said, his voice automatically taking on the flat, authoritative tone he used during stops. "Officer." "I'm going to reach for my documents now," Amara said, making each movement deliberate. She opened the glove compartment slowly and removed her registration. Then she reached for her purse on the passenger seat to get her wallet, which contained both her driver's license and her police ID. The movement toward the purse triggered something in Kendall. Later, he would struggle to explain exactly what he saw or thought he saw. A quick motion, a dark object. His training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what was happening. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon and aimed it at Amara. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" His voice rose sharply, echoing in the quiet street. Amara froze, her heart pounding suddenly in her chest. She'd been on both sides of this scenario, had trained hundreds of officers on how to handle traffic stops, had developed department protocols for de-escalation. None of that prevented the rush of fear and anger that surged through her body. "Officer," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort, "I am reaching for my identification. My wallet is in my purse. I am not armed." The couple walking their dog had stopped, the man pulling out his phone. The teenager on the bike had moved closer, watching intently. Two more pedestrians slowed their pace, attention caught by the raised voice and drawn weapon. "Step out of the vehicle slowly," Kendall ordered, his gun still trained on her. The situation had escalated in seconds, and now he felt committed to his course of action. The driver seemed compliant, but something didn't feel right. Why was she so calm? Most people panicked when a gun was pointed at them. Amara assessed her options quickly. Arguing could escalate things further. Identifying herself as a police officer might help, but reaching for her badge now could be misinterpreted. Her best option was to comply and defuse. She opened the car door slowly with her left hand, keeping her right hand visible. "I'm stepping out now," she said clearly. "My name is Amara Wilson. My ID is in my purse on the passenger seat." As she emerged from the vehicle, standing straight in her charcoal pantsuit, Kendall felt a flicker of uncertainty. The woman carried herself with uncommon poise and authority. Her eyes met his directly, not with fear or defiance, but with assessment. "May I reach for my identification now?" she asked. Kendall nodded, keeping his weapon aimed but shifting his stance slightly. Slowly. Amara turned carefully and reached through the open door to retrieve her purse. Every movement was measured, deliberate. She extracted her wallet and opened it to reveal her driver's license alongside a police badge. "Officer, I'm Deputy Chief Wilson from Central Command. This is my department identification." The world seemed to pause for a moment as Kendall processed what he was seeing. The badge looked real. The ID had the department seal. The name, now he remembered where he'd heard it. Deputy Chief Amara Wilson had spoken at his academy graduation. She'd been promoted last year to oversee operations for the entire Eastern Division, and he was pointing his gun at her. The small crowd of onlookers had grown. Someone was definitely recording now. Kendall could feel sweat forming under his collar as the situation shifted beneath his feet like quicksand. It would be at this moment, with tension hanging in the air between them, with Kendall's weapon still drawn and Amara's steady gaze holding his, that everything would change. But the seeds of that change had been planted in the moments before. In Kendall's assumptions, in Amara's experience, in the gathering witnesses, and in the cascade of decisions that had brought them both to this intersection as the last light of day faded from the sky. Time seemed to stretch as Amara stood perfectly still, her department badge and ID extended toward Officer Kendall, whose gun remained pointed at her. The evening air felt suddenly heavy, filled with the whispered comments of the growing crowd of onlookers. "Officer," Amara said again, her voice calm but firm, "I'm Deputy Chief Wilson. Could you please lower your weapon?" Kendall's eyes flicked from her face to the badge and back again. The badge looked authentic enough, but something in him resisted accepting what he was seeing. Deputies chiefs didn't drive ordinary sedans through this neighborhood. They had department SUVs and drivers. They wore uniforms or at least had some visible sign of rank. This had to be some kind of trick. "Ma'am, I need you to place that on the hood of your car and step back," he said, his gun still trained on her. Amara took a slow breath. 20 years on the force had taught her how to manage situations like this. She'd talked down armed suspects, mediated between rival gang members, and diffused domestic disputes that were seconds from violence. But being on this side of a service weapon, being treated like a suspect by one of her own officers, this was different. It pulled at something deep in her chest, a familiar tightness she'd felt too many times before. "Officer Kendall," she said, reading his nameplate. "I understand you're following procedure. I respect that. But I am your superior officer, and I am asking you to lower your weapon while we sort this out." A young woman with braids had stopped at the corner, phone raised, clearly recording. Two more people joined her, then another. Across the street, an older man stepped out onto his porch, arms folded as he watched the scene unfold. Kendall felt sweat trickle down his back. The woman knew his name without him introducing himself. She certainly spoke with authority, but his training had emphasized caution above all else. False identification was common. Anyone could buy a fake badge online, and something just felt off about the whole situation. "Place the ID on the hood and step back to the rear of the vehicle," he repeated, gesturing slightly with his gun. Amara considered her options. She could comply, continue trying to de-escalate, or she could assert her authority more forcefully. The growing audience complicated things. This was rapidly becoming not just a personal indignity but a public incident. Whatever happened next would reflect on the department, on her leadership, on community relations that were already fragile. "I'm going to follow your instructions," she said clearly, "and then we're going to call this in to dispatch for verification." She placed her wallet with the badge displayed on the hood of her car and stepped back as directed, moving to the rear of her sedan with measured steps. The position left her feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way that made her shoulder blades tighten. Now she stood in the glare of the patrol car's headlights, her shadow stretching long across the pavement. Kendall approached the hood cautiously, never taking his eyes off her. He kept his gun in a low-ready position as he glanced down at the ID. The badge was heavy, metal with the city seal and a number. The ID card beside it showed the woman's face, the department logo, and the title Deputy Chief clearly printed. It looked real. Too real to be a quick fake. A flutter of doubt crept in. What if she really was who she claimed to be? "Stay where you are," he said, then reached for his radio with his free hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need verification on a department ID. Subject claims to be Deputy Chief Wilson." The radio crackled. "Unit 47, did you say Deputy Chief Wilson?" "Affirmative. I have a traffic stop with a subject claiming that identity. Need verification." There was a pause, then, "Stand by, Unit 47. The waiting stretched uncomfortably. Amara remained at the rear of her car, watching Kendall with steady eyes. The crowd had grown to about a dozen people now. Someone had brought out a small child who should have been in bed. A few were talking among themselves, gesturing toward the scene. "Man, he still got his gun out." A voice carried from the crowd. "That's messed up. Who'd she say she was?" "Some kind of chief." Kendall felt the pressure building. If this woman was who she claimed to be, he was making a serious mistake. But if she wasn't, lowering his guard could be dangerous. His training had emphasized that hesitation could be fatal. The uncertainty gnawed at him. The radio finally crackled to life. "Unit 47, be advised, Deputy Chief Wilson is off duty today. Can you provide a description of the subject?" Before Kendall could answer, Amara spoke up, her voice carrying clearly. "Dispatch, this is Wilson. Badge number 5729. Authorization code Baker 739. Please inform Officer Kendall that I am, in fact, who I claim to be." The use of an authorization code, something only command staff would know, sent a jolt through Kendall. The woman's confident tone made his certainty waver further. But something in him still resisted, a stubborn belief that he couldn't be this wrong. "Ma'am, please remain silent until—" The radio interrupted him. "Unit 47, authorization code confirmed. That is Deputy Chief Wilson. Please stand down immediately." The words hit Kendall like a physical blow. His gun lowered slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had drawn his weapon on a deputy chief. His career flashed before his eyes. Academy graduation, his first arrest, the commendation last year for bravery. All potentially over because of this mistake. But even as the realization dawned, something hardened in him. A defensiveness. This wasn't entirely his fault. Why was she driving an unmarked car? Why wasn't she in uniform? Why didn't she identify herself immediately? "My apologies, ma'am," he said, lowering his weapon but not holstering it. "You should have identified yourself right away." Amara's eyebrows rose slightly. "Officer Kendall, I attempted to reach for my identification when you first approached and you drew your weapon. I then verbally identified myself and you kept your weapon drawn." "You made sudden movements toward the glove box," Kendall countered, his voice taking on an edge. "Standard procedure for suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior," Amara repeated, the words hanging in the air between them. "And what exactly made my behavior suspicious, Officer Kendall?" The question hung there, loaded with implications. The crowd had grown quieter, straining to hear the exchange. Phones remained raised, recording everything. Kendall's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, Lieutenant Reynolds is en route to your location." 8 to 2 minutes, great, Kendall thought. Reynolds was a by-the-book supervisor who had already written Kendall up twice for minor procedural violations. This was about to get worse. "You can return to your vehicle, Deputy Chief," Kendall said, finally holstering his weapon. "Sorry for the confusion." Amara didn't move. "I think we should wait for Lieutenant Reynolds, don't you?" "We have some things to discuss." The tension in her voice was controlled but unmistakable. Kendall felt his face grow hot, embarrassment and anger mixing uncomfortably under his skin. "Look, I was just doing my job," he said, his voice dropping. "You made a traffic violation. I couldn't clearly see into the vehicle. You reached suddenly for the glove box. These are all warning signs we're trained to watch for. And after I complied with all your commands? After I clearly identified myself? After I showed you my badge? What's the explanation for keeping your weapon drawn then, officer?" Kendall's jaw tightened. "I needed verification. Anyone can buy a fake badge." A flicker of something, disappointment, anger, weariness, crossed Amara's face. "A fake badge," she repeated. "I see." Headlights swung around the corner as another patrol car approached. Lieutenant Reynolds, a stocky man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, stepped out and surveyed the scene with obvious concern. The crowd, the traffic stop, the palpable tension, none of it looked good. "Deputy Chief Wilson," he said, approaching with quick steps. "Is everything all right?" "No, Thomas, everything is not all right," Amara said, using his first name deliberately. "Officer Kendall here pulled me over for a minor traffic violation, drew his weapon when I reached for my identification, kept it drawn after I identified myself as a police officer, and continued to point it at me even after I showed him my badge and ID." Reynolds's face darkened as he turned to look at Kendall. "Is this accurate, officer?" Kendall straightened his back. "Sir, I followed procedure for a suspicious traffic stop." The subject made sudden movements and— "The subject?" Amara interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "I am the Deputy Chief of Police for this department, Officer Kendall. I help write the procedures you claim to be following." Reynolds stepped between them slightly, a peacemaking gesture. "Let's take a breath here. Kendall, holster your weapon if you haven't already and turn off your lights. Deputy Chief, would you prefer to discuss this here or at the station?" Before Amara could answer, a new voice called from across the street. "Amara, is that you?" All three officers turned to see Police Chief Robert Garcia, stepping out of an unmarked SUV that had pulled up quietly during their exchange. The crowd murmured with renewed interest as the chief, still in his full uniform from the day, approached with concerned strides. Kendall's stomach dropped to his shoes. This had just gone from bad to catastrophic. Chief Garcia took in the scene with a quick glance, the patrol car with lights still flashing, Amara standing at the rear of her sedan, the gathering of onlookers with phones recording, and the obvious tension between his officers. "Would someone like to explain to me?" he said in a deceptively calm voice. "Why my deputy chief is being treated like a suspect at a traffic stop in her own neighborhood?" The arrival of Chief Garcia changed the atmosphere instantly. The small crowd of onlookers, which had grown to about 20 people, fell into a hushed silence. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Officer Kendall stood frozen, his face pale in the harsh glow of the streetlight. "Well?" Chief Garcia repeated, his voice carrying in the quiet street. "I'm waiting for an explanation." Amara stepped forward, her composure intact despite the tension of the past several minutes. "Robert, I was driving home and apparently failed to signal a turn." Officer Kendall conducted a traffic stop, which was appropriate. What followed was not. The chief's eyes narrowed as he turned to Kendall. "Officer?" Kendall straightened his posture, training kicking in. "Sir, I conducted a routine traffic stop for a failure to signal. The driver made suspicious movements toward the glove compartment, which prompted me to draw my weapon for safety." "And after she identified herself as a deputy chief?" Garcia asked, his voice deceptively calm. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on Kendall's forehead despite the cool evening air. "I requested verification of her identity, sir. Protocol states that we should verify credentials while holding her at gunpoint." Garcia interrupted. "I maintained a defensive position until her identity could be confirmed," Kendall said, his voice taking on a stubborn edge. Lieutenant Reynolds shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Chief, I just arrived, but dispatch did confirm Deputy Chief Wilson's identity over the radio." Chief Garcia nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Amara, what exactly happened after you showed your badge and identification?" Amara's eyes never left Kendall's face as she answered. He looked at my badge and laughed. The simple statement hit like a thunderclap in the quiet street. Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle. "He what?" Garcia's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. "He laughed," Amara repeated, "and suggested my badge was fake." All eyes turned to Kendall, who shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. His jaw worked as he struggled to find a response. "That's not exactly—" he began, then stopped. "I expressed doubt about the authenticity of her credentials, which is reasonable given that counterfeit police identification exists and—" "You laughed at her badge?" Garcia cut in incredulous. Kendall's face flushed. "Sir, with all due respect, deputy chiefs don't typically drive personal vehicles without identifying markers. They don't typically travel alone through neighborhoods like this. The situation was unusual and I exercised appropriate caution." "Neighborhoods like this?" Amara's voice was quiet but razor sharp. "Officer Kendall, I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. It's my home." The implications of Kendall's words settled over the scene. In the crowd, phones remained raised, recording every word of the exchange. A teenager whispered something to his friend, who nodded grimly. Chief Garcia took a slow breath, visibly struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "Lieutenant Reynolds, please take Officer Kendall's weapon and badge." "Sir?" Kendall's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. "You heard me," Garcia said. "You're suspended pending a full review of this incident." Kendall's hand moved protectively toward his holster. "Chief, this is an overreaction. I was following what exactly?" Garcia's voice rose for the first time. "What protocol involves laughing at the identification of a superior officer? What training tells you to maintain a weapon pointed at someone who has clearly identified themselves as law enforcement?" "She could have been lying." Kendall burst out, his composure finally cracking. "How was I supposed to know it wasn't some fake badge she ordered online?" The moment the words left his mouth, Kendall seemed to realize his mistake. The crowd murmured and several people shook their heads. Lieutenant Reynolds closed his eyes briefly as if pained. Amara's expression remained controlled, but her eyes flashed. "Officer Kendall, would you mind showing me your badge?" The request caught him off guard. "What?" "Your badge," she repeated calmly. "I'd like to see it." Reluctantly, Kendall unclipped his badge from his uniform and held it out. Amara took it, examined it carefully, then handed it back with a slight smile. "How do I know this is real?" she asked. "Maybe you ordered it online." The crowd reacted with a mixture of gasps and low laughter. Someone called out, "She got you there, officer." Kendall's face twisted with frustration and embarrassment. "That's different. I'm in uniform. You're in a costume that can be purchased at any Halloween store," Amara countered. "Your car has lights that anyone can buy online. Your badge looks very similar to ones sold as novelties." She paused, letting the parallel sink in. "The difference, Officer Kendall, is that when you approach someone claiming authority, they are expected to respect that claim immediately, without question. But when I presented my authority to you, you laughed." The statement hung in the air like a verdict. Chief Garcia nodded slightly, a gesture of approval at Amara's handling of the situation. She had managed to make her point without raising her voice, without losing control, all while being recorded by dozens of devices. Kendall looked around, seeming to finally grasp the seriousness of his situation. His eyes tracked over the crowd, the phones, his fellow officers' faces. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I may have reacted inappropriately," he conceded. though his tone lacked genuine remorse. "Your weapon and badge, officer," Lieutenant Reynolds prompted. Hand extended. Kendall hesitated, then slowly unholstered his weapon, cleared it according to protocol, and handed it over. His badge followed, the metal catching the streetlight as it passed from his hand to the lieutenant's. "Report to Internal Affairs tomorrow at 800, Chief Garcia instructed. "Lieutenant Reynolds will drive you back to the station now. Sir, my patrol car will be dealt with," Garcia finished firmly. "You're dismissed, officer." As Reynolds led a subdued Kendall toward his vehicle, Amara watched them go with mixed emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing a fellow officer disciplined, even one who had treated her so poorly. The department would lose another officer, likely for good considering the severity of the incident. The community would see yet another example of problematic policing. No one really won here. Chief Garcia turned to her once Kendall was out of earshot. "Are you all right, Amara?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern, almost cracked her carefully maintained composure. She nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. "I've been better," she admitted finally. "But I've been worse too." Garcia shook his head, anger still visible in the tight lines around his mouth. "This should never have happened. Not to anyone, but especially not to you. But it did happen," Amara said quietly. "And it happens to people who don't have a badge to protect them every day." The chief nodded soberly. "I know." He glanced at the crowd, which showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, it had grown larger as word spread through the neighborhood. "We should make a statement." Amara considered this, then shook her head. "Not tonight, Robert. Tonight I just want to go home. We'll deal with the fallout tomorrow." "At least let me drive you," he offered. "I'm fine to drive myself," she said with a small smile. "It's only a few blocks, and I think I've had enough police escorts for one evening." Garcia nodded reluctantly. "I'll follow up with Internal Affairs tonight. This won't be swept under the rug, Amara, I promise you that." "I know," she said, and she did. Robert Garcia had been a reformer since taking over as chief 3 years ago. He wouldn't let this incident fade away. As she walked back to her car, Amara felt the eyes of the community on her. Some curious, some angry, some relieved that the situation hadn't escalated further. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, phone still in hand. "Deputy Chief?" she called. "I got it all. The whole thing, from when he pulled his gun on you. If you need the video for evidence, just let me know." Amara nodded gratefully. "Thank you. The department will likely want to collect all videos as part of the investigation." The woman hesitated, then asked, "Will anything actually happen to him? For real?" The question carried the weight of too many past disappointments, too many incidents where consequences never materialized. Amara looked the woman in the eye. "Yes," she said firmly. "Something will happen. I'll make sure of it." As the crowd began to disperse, Amara finally got back into her car. The interior felt like a sanctuary after the tension of the past half hour. She sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, interviews, media inquiries, and difficult conversations. The incident would become a case study, a talking point, perhaps even a catalyst for change. But for tonight, she just wanted her shower, her glass of wine, and the comfort of her own home. She started the engine, checked her mirrors, and properly signaled before pulling away from the curb. In her rearview mirror, she could see Chief Garcia watching her car until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. The police station hummed with unusual energy the next morning. By 7:30 a.m., everyone had heard about what happened. Whispered conversations stopped whenever Amara walked by, replaced by nods of respect or awkward glances. She ignored them all and headed straight to her office, closing the door firmly behind her. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. Chief Garcia entered without waiting for a response, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He set one on her desk and took a seat opposite her. "It's already on social media," he said without preamble. 3 different videos, all showing pretty much the same thing. "The department phone lines lit up an hour ago." Amara nodded, unsurprised. "What's the response been like?" "About what you'd expect. Community leaders calling for Kendall's immediate termination. The union representatives requesting due process. A few officers defending him, most staying silent. The mayor called me at 6 a.m. and," Amara raised an eyebrow, "he wants this handled quickly and decisively. For once I agree with him." Garcia took a sip of his coffee. Internal Affairs is meeting with Kendall at 8. I've also requested an emergency meeting of the disciplinary board for this afternoon. Amara leaned back in her chair. That's fast, even for something like this. We need it to be fast, Garcia replied. You know how these things typically go. Investigations that drag on for months. Officers placed on paid leave while the community seethes. Trust eroding day by day. We can't afford that this time. Because it happened to me? Amara asked pointedly. Garcia met her gaze directly. Partly, I won't pretend otherwise, but also because it was caught on multiple videos. Because his behavior was clearly inappropriate by any standard. Because we've been working too hard to rebuild community trust to let this undermine everything. Amara nodded slowly. She understood the politics at play. Had it been anyone else, a regular citizen, especially from a marginalized community, the process would likely have moved much slower, regardless of video evidence. The fact that she wore a badge had accelerated everything. I need to know something, Robert, she said after a moment. If I decide this officer deserves a second chance, will you back me on that? Garcia looked surprised. After what he did? You're considering giving him another chance. I'm considering all options, Amara said carefully. I haven't made any decisions yet. But I need to know where you stand. The chief studied her face, then sighed. If that's your recommendation after reviewing all the evidence, yes, I'll back you. But I have to be honest, I think you'd be making a mistake. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Diaz in Internal Affairs. Kendall just arrived. We're set up in interview room 3. They're ready for me downstairs, Amara said, standing up. I should get down there. You don't have to be part of this, Amara, Garcia reminded her. You're the victim in this case. You could recuse yourself, she shook her head. I need to look him in the eye today. I need to hear what he has to say for himself. As they walked through the department, Amara noted the mix of expressions on her colleagues' faces. Most offered supportive nods or quiet words of solidarity. A few, however, averted their eyes or studied their computer screens with sudden interest. Those, she noted mentally, were likely Kendall's supporters. Officers who perhaps shared his views or methods, who could see themselves making the same mistake. Interview room 3 was small and stark, designed to make subjects feel exposed and uncomfortable. When Amara entered behind Garcia, she found Officer Kendall already seated at the table, facing Captain Diaz and Lieutenant Reynolds. A union representative sat beside Kendall, a folder of papers in front of him. Kendall looked like he hadn't slept. His uniform had been replaced by civilian clothes, a button-down shirt and slacks that seemed hastily chosen. When he saw Amara, his eyes widened slightly, then dropped to the table. Deputy Chief Wilson, Captain Diaz, greeted her, standing. Thank you for joining us. We were just about to review the evidence. Amara took a seat at the end of the table, a position that allowed her to observe everyone's faces. Please continue. Captain Diaz nodded and turned to a laptop at his end of the table. We have compiled all available video evidence of the incident. This includes Officer Kendall's body camera footage, dashboard camera footage, and 7 civilian videos that were shared on social media or provided directly to the department. The room darkened slightly as a projector came to life, displaying the first video on the wall. It was Kendall's body camera, showing his perspective as he approached Amara's car. The audio was clear enough to catch his breathing, which noticeably quickened as he neared the vehicle. Driver, please keep your hands visible. His voice came through the speakers. They all watched in silence as the scene unfolded. Amara's calm compliance, Kendall's increasingly aggressive stance, the moment when he drew his weapon. Amara found herself strangely detached, as if watching something that had happened to someone else. When they reached the part where she presented her badge, Captain Diaz paused the video. Officer Kendall, can you explain what happened at this moment? Kendall shifted in his seat. The union representative leaned over to whisper something, but Kendall shook his head slightly. I expressed doubt about the authenticity of her credentials, he said, echoing his words from the night before. That's not what the video shows, Diaz said flatly. He pressed play again. On screen, Amara's voice could be heard clearly. Officer, I'm Deputy Chief Wilson from Central Command. This is my department identification. Then came Kendall's response. A short, unmistakable laugh followed by, right, and I'm the commissioner. Where'd you get that badge? eBay? The room fell silent. The union representative closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. Chief Garcia's jaw tightened visibly. Diaz paused the video again. "Would you like to revise your statement, Officer Kendall?" Kendall's face had flushed a deep red. That was inappropriate. I acknowledge that." "Inappropriate," Amara repeated, speaking for the first time since the video began. "Is that how you would characterize it?" Kendall finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "What do you want me to say? That I messed up? Fine, I messed up. But you have to understand the position I was in. A traffic stop at night in a high-crime area." "My neighborhood is not a high-crime area," Amara cut in. "It's a middle-class residential district with crime rates below the city average." "You're making assumptions again, officer." The union representative cleared his throat. "If I may, Deputy Chief. My client acknowledges his error in judgment, but we believe there were mitigating circumstances that should be considered." "Such as?" Garcia asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "Officer Kendall has an excellent record prior to this incident. He's received commendations for bravery. He's never had a substantiated complaint of racial bias. Until now," Lieutenant Reynolds muttered. The representative continued as if he hadn't heard. "We're prepared to accept a temporary suspension with additional training, but termination would be an overreaction to a single incident in an otherwise exemplary career." Amara studied Kendall's face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. What she saw instead was calculation. A man figuring out how to survive this crisis, how to say what needed to be said to keep his job. "Officer Kendall," she said slowly, "do you believe you treated me differently because I'm a black woman?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Even the union representative seemed startled by its directness. Kendall's expression shuddered. "No, ma'am. I would have responded the same way to anyone making sudden movements during a traffic stop." "And the laughing at my badge? The dismissal of my authority even after verification? Would that have happened if I were a white male officer?" "I can't answer hypotheticals," Kendall replied stiffly. Captain Diaz continued the video playback. They watched as the situation escalated, as Chief Garcia arrived, as Kendall was relieved of his weapon and badge. The additional civilian videos showed different angles, some capturing facial expressions that weren't visible in the body camera footage. In one, Kendall's contemptuous smile was clearly visible as he examined Amara's badge. When all the videos had been viewed, Captain Diaz turned to Kendall once more. "Having seen all the evidence, would you like to make any additional statements?" The union representative started to speak, but Kendall raised a hand to stop him. He seemed to have reached some internal decision. "Look, I made a judgment call that turned out to be wrong. I didn't believe she was really a deputy chief. It seemed unlikely. But I shouldn't have laughed at her badge, and I should have lowered my weapon once her identity was confirmed. That's on me." It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as they were likely to get, but it still lacked any acknowledgement of the underlying issues. Amara noticed he had carefully avoided addressing her question about racial bias. "The disciplinary board will meet at 2 p.m., Chief Garcia announced, standing. "Officer Kendall, you'll have an opportunity to make your case at that time. This interview is concluded." As everyone began to file out of the room, Amara remained seated. Kendall hesitated at the door, then turned back to her. "Deputy Chief," he began, his voice lower now that they were nearly alone. "For what it's worth, I am sorry that things went the way they did." Amara looked up at him, measuring his words carefully. "Are you sorry for what you did, Officer Kendall? Or are you sorry you did it to someone with the power to end your career?" He had no answer for that. After a moment, he turned and left the room, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts and the lingering images from the videos still playing in her mind. By noon, the police headquarters had transformed into something resembling a fortress. News vans lined the street outside. Protesters gathered on the sidewalk, their signs demanding justice and accountability. Inside, officers moved with tense efficiency, exchanging worried glances as they passed each other in the hallways. Amara sat alone in her office, reviewing her notes for the disciplinary hearing. A half-eaten sandwich lay forgotten on her desk. She'd spent the morning fielding calls from community leaders and elected officials, all wanting to know what would happen to Officer Kendall. The mayor had called twice, stressing the importance of getting this right, as if she needed the reminder. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Vivian Chen, the department's public information officer, poked her head in. "Deputy Chief? Got a minute?" Amara gestured for her to enter. Vivian closed the door and sat down, tablet in hand. Social media's exploding, she said without preamble. The videos have been viewed over 2 million times since this morning. Badge Laugher is trending. National news picked it up about an hour ago, Amara sighed. Of course they did. People are planning to pack the lobby for the hearing. I've had 17 interview requests so far. Vivian hesitated. The chief wants to know if you'd consider making a statement before the hearing. No, Amara said firmly. We follow procedure. The board makes its decision, then we talk to the public. Vivian nodded, unsurprised. That's what I told him you'd say. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, most of the department's behind you on this. Even officers who usually defend their own no matter what. And the others? Amara asked. Vivian shrugged. There's always going to be some who think Kendall's being railroaded. But they're the minority this time. After Vivian left, Amara checked her personal phone. 27 text messages from friends and family who'd seen the videos. Her brother had sent a simple, "You okay? Call me." Her mother had called 4 times, another knock at the door. This time it was Lieutenant Reynolds. They're ready for you in the conference room, Deputy Chief. Amara gathered her notes and stood, smoothing her uniform jacket. Time to get this over with. The main conference room had been rearranged for the hearing. A long table at the front held the 5 members of the disciplinary board, Chief Garcia at the center, flanked by 2 captains, the head of internal affairs, and a civilian oversight representative. Kendall sat at a smaller table to one side, his union representative beside him. The room was packed with officers, community members, and press, all watching silently as Amara entered. She took her designated seat, directly across from Kendall. He looked even worse than he had that morning, pale, unshaven, eyes darting nervously around the room. When their gazes met, he quickly looked away. Chief Garcia called the hearing to order, his voice formal and measured. This emergency session of the disciplinary board has been convened to review the conduct of Officer James Kendall during a traffic stop involving Deputy Chief Amara Wilson on the evening of September 28th. We have reviewed all available evidence, including officer body camera footage, dashboard camera footage, civilian recordings, and witness statements. The formal proceedings began with a detailed account of the incident. Captain Diaz narrated as snippets of the videos were displayed on a large screen. The room remained eerily silent except for occasional murmurs of disbelief or anger when particularly damning moments were shown. When it came time for Kendall to speak, he stood stiffly, hands clasped behind his back. I want to formally apologize to Deputy Chief Wilson and to the department, he began, his voice steadier than it had been that morning. My conduct during that traffic stop fell below the standards expected of an officer of this department. I failed to properly verify Deputy Chief Wilson's identity before escalating the situation. I showed disrespect to a superior officer. These actions were wrong. He paused, glancing at his representative, who nodded encouragingly. However, I want to emphasize that my actions were based on legitimate safety concerns during a night traffic stop. I made a split-second decision based on the information available to me at the time. I believed I was following proper procedure for officer safety. My intentions were not malicious or biased in any way. A murmur ran through the audience at this last claim. Someone in the back of the room let out a derisive snort. I've served this department for 6 years with distinction, Kendall continued, his voice taking on a note of desperation. One mistake shouldn't erase that record. I'm willing to accept additional training, suspension, whatever the board deems appropriate, but I'm asking for the chance to learn from this and continue serving. When he finished, the room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Amara. Deputy Chief Wilson, Chief Garcia said, would you like to make a statement? Amara stood slowly, taking a moment to look around the room. She noted the diverse faces watching her. Fellow officers, community members, reporters scribbling notes. Whatever she said now would echo far beyond these walls. What happened 2 nights ago wasn't just about me, she began. If I hadn't been wearing a badge, if I hadn't had the chief of police arrive on scene, if there hadn't been multiple witnesses, recording everything, we all know how this might have ended. Differently, possibly tragically. She turned to look directly at Kendall. Officer Kendall claims his actions weren't biased. I can't see into his heart to know if that's true. But I know this, he made assumptions about who belongs in that neighborhood, about what a deputy chief looks like. about whose authority deserves respect. Those assumptions have consequences. Amara paused, choosing her next words carefully. I've spent 20 years in this department. I've worked with hundreds of officers. Most are dedicated public servants who take their oath seriously, but some carry biases they don't even recognize. Those biases affect how they treat the people they're sworn to protect. She turned back to the board. As a black woman, I've experienced what many in our community face daily. As an officer, I've seen how those experiences erode trust between police and the people we serve. As a leader in this department, I have a responsibility to address these issues openly and honestly. Her voice grew stronger, more resolute. Officer Kendall didn't just disrespect me. He violated core principles of our department: respect, integrity, and equal treatment under the law. His actions, captured for all to see, have damaged public trust. That trust is hard-earned and easily lost. Restoring it requires accountability. Real accountability, not just words. When she finished, the room remained silent for several long seconds. Chief Garcia cleared his throat. Thank you, Deputy Chief. The board will now deliberate. The deliberation took less than 30 minutes. When the board members returned, their faces were solemn. Chief Garcia addressed the room. This board has reviewed all evidence and testimony regarding the conduct of Officer James Kendall. The evidence clearly shows multiple violations of department policy, including unnecessary use of force, failure to follow proper identification protocols, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. Garcia paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The actions we've witnessed are incompatible with the standards we expect from those who wear our badge. Officer Kendall's behavior shows a fundamental failure to uphold the trust placed in him as a law enforcement officer. Kendall stared straight ahead, his face rigid. Therefore, it is the unanimous decision of this board that Officer James Kendall be immediately terminated from his position with this department, effective immediately. His actions will also be referred to the State Certification Board for review. The room erupted in reactions, gasps, murmurs, a few shouts of approval from the community members present. Kendall's shoulders slumped as his representative leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. As the noise subsided, Chief Garcia continued. Additionally, this incident has highlighted the need for department-wide review of our training procedures, particularly regarding identification protocols and unconscious bias. Deputy Chief Wilson will lead this review, with input from community partners and oversight committees. 30 minutes later, after the formal proceedings had concluded, Amara stood outside the building, facing a crowd of reporters and community members. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the plaza. Today's decision sends a clear message, she told them, camera lights flashing in her face. A badge is not a shield from accountability. It's a symbol of responsibility, to the law, to the community, and to each other. As questions flew at her from all directions, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd, the young woman who had recorded the incident on her phone. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. Later that evening, after the cameras had gone and the crowds had dispersed, Amara finally returned home. She kicked off her shoes at the door and poured the glass of wine she'd been thinking about for 2 days. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chief Garcia. You did good today. This is just the beginning of the work, though, she typed back. I know. See you tomorrow. Sitting on her couch, Amara looked out at her neighborhood in the gathering dusk. Children played in a yard across the street. An elderly couple walked their dog. A delivery driver dropped off a package a few houses down. This was her community, the one she had sworn to protect, the one where she had been treated as a threat. The irony wasn't lost on her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to create change from within. But for tonight, she allowed herself this moment of quiet reflection, this small victory in a battle that was far from over.